Our opening plenary speaker today is Betty Azar. Many of you have probably heard her name before from the series of grammar-based textbooks she wrote, often referred to as Blue Azar, Black Azar, and Red Azar. For the last 25 years, they have been among the most widely used ELT textbooks in the field. Betty has said that people often ask her how she got into writing textbooks. Well, in the late 60s through the 70s, she was teaching at an intensive English program that prepared students to enter American universities. Like many other teachers, she couldn't find the textbooks she needed, so she started writing her own materials. Over the years, her files of dittos got larger and larger. As Betty went to class with purple ditto ink on her hands, her clothes, and her nose. One day, a publisher's rep stopped by her office at the university and said he'd heard she'd written some of her own materials. He asked if she'd ever thought about publication, and she said, "Who, me? I'm just a teacher." And he said, "Well, that's who writes textbooks." And that's how it started. Betty said that she didn't know that people who were just teachers wrote textbooks, but then learned that at least 90%, if not more, of the materials you'll see in the TESOL exhibit area are written by teachers just like her, just like you, just like me. At any rate, she sat down at her portable typewriter in a spare bedroom in 1978 and started creating a textbook out of the reams of dittos she'd written over the years and her note cards full of usage examples. Today, almost 30 years later, she's still creating teaching materials, the latest ones in multimedia. And she's still rewriting and reworking her textbooks. She calls them her forever works in progress. They continually change, just as the field continually changes and as her views of language teaching change. She had said that when she published her first book, the Blue Book, for those of you familiar with the color of her texts, back in 1981, that she hoped that maybe a few other teachers would find her grammar-based textbook helpful for their students, too. Her secret hope was that maybe even enough teachers would use it so that she might be able to redecorate her living room. Maybe a new carpet, and if she was really lucky, maybe even a new sofa. She had no idea that the material she created would come to be used over the years by millions of English language learners in almost every corner of the globe. Betty has been in English language teaching since 1965, first as a classroom teacher and later as a full-time materials writer. She has been a longtime member and friend of TESOL, a frequent convention attendee, and a member of the Materials Writers Intersection. She has seen many tides of change in our field over the past 42 years. And amid all these changes, teachers and material writers, whom she calls frontline practitioners, have had to decide on their own pedagogical practices and principles. What guides them in this process? What are the factors that determine why practitioners do what they do? Today, Betty is going to share her perceptions of how teachers and material writers make their pedagogical decisions amid the ever-changing tides in approaches and methods in teaching English language. Please join me in welcoming Betty Azar.
Goodness. Good morning, I guess, everyone, or I guess good afternoon. Thank you, Suzanne, for that introduction. All I have to say is that, yes, I did get the sofa, and I had it for years and years and years. And thank you. That was a very warm reception. I really appreciate it from my heart. And when I sat down, as Suzanne said, when I sat down in 1978 in my spare bedroom with my portable typewriter and I typed the words Chapter 1, I never had any idea in my wildest imagination that I would ever be here speaking in front of all of you at the opening plenary at TESOL. I am deeply honored to be here. This is a very special event for me. So thank you. I also have to say that I'm utterly amazed that I'm actually doing this. But anyway, you make me feel very welcome. And in return, I would like to welcome you to the great and beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm a born and bred Midwesterner from Iowa, but the great Pacific Northwest has been my home now for 25 years. I live on an island just north of Seattle, Whidbey Island, a very large island. So for me to get to TESOL this year was very easy. A 15-minute ferry ride, a half-an-hour drive in. But you know, I realized on the ferry that I was missing one of my favorite parts of coming to TESOL. And that is, don't just listen here for a minute, and that is sitting in the waiting room at the airport for the TESOL destination city and guessing who else is going to TESOL. I knew it. I'm not the only one who does it. Phew. Good. Last year, I managed to pick out 2 immediately. And indeed, as soon as I got to Tampa, I saw them right there at the registration desk and ended up actually sitting next to one of them at the opening plenary and having a nice chat. As Suzanne said, I have been coming to TESOL for a long time, about 30 years now. And you know, it used to be really easy to pick out who in an airport waiting room was going to TESOL, because any combination of ethnic clothing, beads, and Birkenstocks was a dead giveaway that person was going to TESOL, myself included. And for those of you in the back of the room, no, I'm not wearing my Birkenstocks today. They're home in my closet. I don't know really now these days what makes us so recognizable to each other, but I do know what makes us special as a professional group, and I would like to share that perception with you near the end of my talk today. But first, I need to go back to the beginning and say that I started teaching ESL pretty much by accident, as Suzanne said, back in 1965, at the very tender age of 24. And I'm just pausing so you can do the arithmetic. Gotcha. I'm 65. The only point I'm trying to make is that I have been around the field for a long time, and fortunately, the theme for this year's TESOL conference is Tides of Change, and I certainly have seen a number of changes in theories, methods, and materials in the time that I've been in the field, and when I was a student. So, bear with me, starting with grammar translation as a college student of French. I have been around for the audiolingual method, total physical response, Suggestopedia, the silent way, notional functional, peer counseling, the natural approach, community language learning, content-based teaching, task-based teaching, the lexical approach, ever-evolving forms and controversies over grammar teaching, and ever-evolving forms and definitions of communicative language teaching. And that's not even all the options. Those are just the ones I could think of. And on top of that, there are some in the field who now say that we are in the post-methods era. So, my question is, amid all this, what guides us as teachers? How do teachers and materials writers, the ones I call the frontline practitioners, how do they navigate these ever-changing currents? And how do we find our own way and our own teaching practices and principles? To answer that, I can't speak for everyone, of course, but I can share my experiences and observations I have made during the somewhat long time I have been in the field. And I hope perhaps they resonate with some of you as you ask yourselves what guides you in your teaching and your materials writing. And I think almost by definition, if you are an English language teacher, you are a materials writer. I think we are just inveterate writers of materials for our own classes. It's in our blood. I'd like to start by telling you about a seminal experience I had early in my career when I really didn't know quite exactly what I was doing. I was pretty much a blank slate. But boy, I learned some very important lessons about language teaching. In my first year of teaching, I was hired to teach in an intensive summer institute at a university. It used the Lotto Freeze audiolingual method almost exclusively. And as a new, untrained, inexperienced teacher, I was assigned to teach the Red Book. For those of you who've been around for a while, that means the pattern practice book. The pattern practice book pretty much consisted of repetitious oral drills of meaningless sentences. Now that's my description. And I found it absolutely deadly to do this for an entire hour, especially after lunch with the Iowa sun pouring in the windows, and I had trouble staying awake, and so did the students. So, we're dealing with grammar patterns. Audiolingual pattern practice is grammar-based. So I let the students ask questions, and they thought that was fun, and they had a lot of questions, and then I started writing examples on the board, and then pretty soon I was bringing handouts to class, and pretty soon they were doing writing, and I was marking writing for them. We started some journal writing. And then we ended up the class with about 10 minutes of just open-ended conversation, whatever the students wanted to talk about, sometimes using the student newspaper. Well, one day my class was monitored by the director of the program, who was a University of Michigan graduate, very trained in the audiolingual method. I thought class had gone very well, and after all the students left, the director came and talked to me. Well, he was very alarmed. He told me that I did not understand the theory behind audiolingual method. I was ruining the whole program. The students' brains were not being properly conditioned, and the students were not going to learn English if I did not do exactly what I was supposed to do in the pattern practice book. Did I understand? I said, yes, of course. So I went to class the next day and I told the students that we needed to follow the textbook exactly because that was the best way for them to learn English, and the director had assured me of that. Well, the students weren't buying it. And shall I say, were vocal in their displeasure. They wanted to keep doing what we had been doing. I need to explain very quickly here that these students were all headed for university study. Many of them were graduate students. They were experienced learners. Many of them were experienced language learners that I believe were above the level of the audiolingual materials. They were in a hurry. They had a lot of questions about how English works, and they wanted to try their wings in a variety of ways. And they literally rebelled against returning to the pattern practice book. So I said, oh dear, I have a problem here. I'm caught between the director and the students. So I came up with a compromise. I said, how about this? We'll do the pattern practice book during class, and then I will meet you every day for an hour, 4 to 5, after the whole program is over, after your laboratory period and your whole day in class, and we'll have a tutorial. They said, fine. I said, we will do whatever you want to do. That hour is yours. I will be there. Well, a long story short, word got out about Mrs. Azar's after-hours tutorial. The room was filled with students every day. Students from other classes came and asked if they couldn't please join. We continued to doing what we had been doing in pattern practice class. And yes, it was a lot of work for me. They did a lot of writing, and I didn't really know what I was doing, so it was a lot of preparation for me, but I loved it. It was exciting teaching, and it is really what hooked me on ESL. The class was not just a tutorial for the students. It was a major tutorial for their 24-year-old teacher. I am sure that I learned more than they did. This experience with audiolingual and the tutorial was very instructive. My experience with the notion that there was only one right, best way to teach language, and that teachers were only functionaries or facilitators of method, or what I would call interchangeable automatons. I am a little prejudicial, I understand. If I have learned anything over the years, it is that there are many right ways to teach a second language, and no one has all the answers, not yet. This means that teachers should never be expected to, or should never expect to themselves, go into any or all teaching situations with a preset method to rigidly follow, or some doctrinaire ideological stance that they impose on the situation. To me, that takes the heart, the art, and the humanity out of what it means to be a teacher. So to me, probably the most important guide for a teacher is first knowing his or her students, their needs, their expectations, abilities, backgrounds, learning styles, language goals, educational and work goals, and then adapting his or her teaching methods and materials to those particular students. Amid all the changes in educational theory and practice, it seems to me that there is one crucial constant in all good teaching, and that is the capacity for empathy, the ability of a teacher to understand the learning experience through the eyes of his or her students, and then connect with those students, respond to their needs, adapt methods and materials, and work in partnership with them. Throughout my years in the classroom, my students were by far my most important guides. I have always said that I owe my textbooks to my students. They were my best teachers. I also learned some things about how teachers make their choices during my encounter with the silent way, developed by Caleb Gategno, another one of the many tides in our ever-changing field. One of the faculty members in our program was a real devotee, a real true believer in the silent way. So I would sit in on her classes, sit back in the corner, or fly on the wall. And as she taught, she never said a word in English or any other language. When she was looking for a particular word from the class, she'd use her hands and arms and facial expressions and point frantically at her colored charts. But when the students had trouble coming up with the word she wanted, I really had trouble just blurting it out and saying, this is the word and this is how you pronounce it. And I understood the principle, all right, that students need to create their own language. And yes, often teachers do talk too much. But I decided that for me to teach the silent way, I would have to go to class with a roll of duct tape to put over my mouth. The silent way was not for me for some important reasons. As a teacher, I needed to talk and laugh with my students throughout the class period. That's how I create the kind of accepting, friendly, fun learning environment that I want in my classroom. It is also how I have fun as a teacher. And my enjoyment of teaching strongly affects the students' enjoyment of learning. If the teacher's not having fun, I can guarantee you the students are not having fun. One of my core beliefs as a teacher is that a good rapport with one's class is vital to good language teaching. A class and I need to click. I know you understand what I mean. A class and I need to click for me to feel that I am being my most effective as a teacher. And I can't create that click without talking and laughing with my students, getting to know them as real people, and getting all of us on the same page, on the same side. My way of interacting with a class, a constant verbal give and take with a lot of humor, is part of who I am as a social being and how I relate to people. And just as importantly, a spontaneous give and take is also an integral part of my teaching methods and my teaching beliefs. I felt then and still feel that teacher talk is a valuable resource for second language students. Balanced, of course, with student talk, and balanced, of course, with giving them ample opportunity to create their own language. So to me, another important component of what guides us as teachers is this. We have to recognize what methods are suitable for who we are as people, how we see our roles as teachers, and how we believe we are most effective as teachers. And that cannot be the same for every teacher. Teachers need to let themselves be guided by knowing who they are and bring that person to class. Not invent a new persona or try to squeeze that person into someone else's idea of what a teacher is. Just as I could never fit myself into the roles required by the audiolingual method or the silent way, even though other teachers prospered in those roles, and I'm sure their students did too. Then there's the natural approach. Whenever I think of the natural approach, I think of Oscar. All of you have had a student like Oscar, I am sure. Oscar was 18 years old, from Peru. He placed in our beginning class. Very cheerful, friendly, wonderful young man. After about 6 weeks, I and the other teachers noticed that Oscar's English was getting really good fast. I thought, wow, we're doing a good job. But I thought, I wonder what's going on here. So one day after class, I pulled Oscar aside and I said, Oscar, your English is getting really good, really fast. Are you watching a lot of television? Are you reading a lot? Are you spending a lot of time with your host family? And Oscar said, oh no, teacher, I don't have time for those things. I have an American girlfriend. So, I mean, Oscar shows us the importance of meaningful input, right? The importance of meaningful interaction, motivation, using your natural aptitudes, getting real-time experience with English. I mean, all those things that we try to do in our classrooms. And if we could just bottle it, maybe we could create a new approach. We could call it the dating service approach to second language. I bet we'd get great research results. At any rate, I learned a lot about what guided me as a teacher from my encounters with the natural approach and the theories of Stephen Krashen, who's had many positive influences on the field, especially in popularizing aspects of communicative language teaching. The big buzzwords at our curriculum meetings back in the 70s were communicative competence, a term coined by Del Himes. Then the natural approach appeared in the early 80s, and ideas about communicative language teaching are still undergoing continual development and redefinition. I think that the evolution of communicative language teaching is easily the most significant development in second language teaching during the time that I have been in the field. But those in the naturalist movement in language teaching often argued, often zealously, actually overzealously at times, I thought, against the teaching of any grammar at all to anyone, native speakers and non-native speakers alike. And those were the years, because of the naturalist movement, that the teaching of grammar, for the most part, disappeared from the US and UK school curricula. They're now somewhat making a comeback, especially in the UK. But here I was, all right? There was this strong zero grammar, anti-grammar movement, and here I was, brand new author of grammar-based materials, saying, wow, what is going on here? So we practitioners run into a number of theories about second language acquisition. And when we do, I don't think we have any choice as teachers, as practitioners, but to evaluate a theory and the research that supports it by testing it against our own observations. Saying, yes, this makes sense to me, or no, that doesn't coincide with my observations. In my case, zero grammar and the premises upon which it was based did not make sense to me, nor reflect my experiences as a teacher, nor as a language learner myself. It was my observation that a grammar component in a balanced program of second language instruction, one component in a balanced program of second language instruction, was helpful for the students I taught. Not everybody, the students I taught. And certainly my students seem to think so too. I mean, of course, we might have all been delusional, but who knows? I don't think so. I think that we teachers know when things we do in class work. And I think we know when they don't work. Our students let us know. We need to trust our own pedagogical observations, trust the validity of our own perceptions in the classroom. We are often our own best guides. There is an expertise that comes from cumulative experience in the classroom that cannot be learned in any other way. One of my perceptions is that grammar teaching and communicative language teaching are not and never have been mutually exclusive. I think those who say you can't teach communicatively if you also include explicit grammar are simply giving you a false choice. Grammar-based teaching and communicative language teaching fit hand in glove. They are meant for each other. And I certainly was not alone in trusting the observation that a grammar component was helpful for students. The numbers of teachers using grammar-based materials skyrocketed during the zero grammar heyday of the 80s and the 90s. Every other grammar-based materials writer knows that too. There was a real disconnect somewhere in our field. Nor was I alone in the observation that grammar could be blended with communicative teaching. It seems to me that practitioners, both teachers and materials writers, and really, as Suzanne said, materials writers by and large are simply teachers who decided to write books. I think the practitioners were ahead of the curve on that, and perhaps still are. In many of the reviews that I have read of my textbooks, all written by teachers, by people who actually are in the classroom, starting way back in the early 80s and mid 80s, it was abundantly clear to me that teachers were not about ready to get, many teachers, not all, were not about ready to throw out the baby, but they were certainly changing the bathwater, mixing in a variety of communicative methods and materials into the bathwater. Looking for what one teacher recently called, I liked this term, a hybrid that works. So there we have another important guide. All of us are guided in very significant ways by our fellow teachers. I've learned a lot from the reviews about what works for other teachers and doesn't work, but I also learned a whole lot about teaching while drinking coffee in the faculty lounge between classes. Other teachers sharing their ideas, standing in the ditto machine line. What are you doing in your class? And trying new things. Or of course, learning from other teachers in our numerous curriculum meetings. And especially the exciting ones were after TESOL conferences, when those of the faculty who had gone would come back with wonderful ideas to teach each other. I mean, I love shop talk. I don't know of any ESL, EFL teacher who doesn't love shop talk. I have a new co-author now for the textbooks, and she and I are thoroughly enjoying engaging in shop talk. She's an experienced teacher and experienced materials writer, and no matter how long I have been doing this, I continually learn from her, and she from me. And I think we are representative of a lot of teachers. Teachers teach teachers, always open to new and better ways of doing what we do. My favorite presentations at TESOL are always those by other teachers. How they use authentic materials is one example. There was one last year on using fortune cookies and flower seed packages. What a wonderful idea. Another one on compiling oral histories among her immigrant students. This year there's a session on using the internet for students to write restaurant review blogs. That is a really, they all go to the restaurant together and then they blog, oops, sorry, oh dear. Then they blog to each other. And then another a TESOL presentation I always enjoy going to, always learn from, is what other teachers are doing with the Generation 1.5 students in their reading and writing, their academic language skills, the ones for whom accuracy with influency did not simply just happen. I just love to read through the whole TESOL catalog and find out what teachers are up to in their classes. Experienced teachers who are still full of enthusiasm, are still trying new things in their teaching, are some of the best guides any of us could hope for. It seems to me that English language teachers are exceptionally resourceful and innovative, are great experimenters, are constantly trying this and trying that. So teachers are researchers too. Every time a teacher goes into a classroom and tries something new, the teacher is engaging in research. And then when they share what they have learned about what works for them at conferences or papers or articles, the rest of us learn from our fellow teachers also. And some teachers, of course, share by becoming published materials writers. As Suzanne said, most of the textbooks that you see in the exhibit hall were written by current or former teachers, just like all of you. If I could take my hat off for just a moment to my fellow material writers, they are another important guide in the field. I have been strongly influenced and guided by other materials writers, especially when I was a young teacher. There is a lot of on-the-job training in learning to teach a second language, and materials writers, I think, often give us some footsteps to follow as we find our own path. I'll mention just one materials writer who was an important guide for me. There have been many, but that was Thomas Crowell and his Index to Modern English. My students at the beginning asked me questions about grammar that I could not possibly answer. I was so glad to have his book as a resource. And his insights gave me the foundation, the starting point from which I later developed my own pedagogical grammar materials. So that leads us to yet another important guide. It goes without saying that we are guided by the observations and ideas of those who study and write about language acquisition, the researchers and theorists, the scholars among us. Our field is rich in academic resources, and there has just been an explosion of research in the past decade or so. Two writers about language teaching who I found very helpful in my early teaching days were Wilga Rivers, and I just have to say that she won my heart by one little sentence she stuck in the middle of her textbook on how to teach a second language. And it said something to the effect, and probably, if it works, use it. I said, oh, I like your pragmatism. But she also gave me many, many other insights in what to do in the class. And the other was Earl Stevick. I couldn't begin to list them all. There have been many more since then. I'm sure all of you can name mentors and teachers who have helped you, guided you as you grow and change as teachers. Those who research and write about teaching language offer those of us who are practitioners a wealth of ideas and information to explore and evaluate. They support us, challenge us, inform us, guide us, help us in the decisions that we make. But we are the ones who have to make the decisions about our own practices and our own principles. And I believe that we practitioners are the ones who ultimately determine the directions our field takes by finding eclectically and pragmatically ways that work for us and our students. I think what matters most in creating successful language learning experiences for our students is not any particular approach or method or materials, but the teacher. The observant, responsive, informed teacher making good choices for and with her or his students. And then in conclusion, there is one other important part to what guides us. Teaching English as a second or foreign language takes teachers far beyond considerations purely of materials and method. Part of what guides us is our desire to foster cross-cultural understanding and international perspectives, which is just a daily part of our jobs. As a professional group, we are aware of, are especially sensitive to, and respectful of cultural differences and diversity. But as English language teachers, in our day-to-day work with international students, we see beyond, or rather I like to think of it as beneath those differences. See that our similarities as human beings are far greater and far deeper than cultural differences. One of the best parts of being a TESOL professional is getting to reach our hands across cultural barriers, connecting human being to human being with our students in ways that many people never get to experience. I'd like to share one more story with you. It's a story about a correspondence that I had with the Greater Greensboro, North Carolina Public Library ESL Conversation Club. And I figured if they could just say the name of their club, their English must be pretty good. But in the mail one day, I got a booklet made to thank me for my books. It was a class project. And you know how when a student comes up after class out of the blue and says, wow, that was a really great class, thanks, I really learned a lot today, I really like what we're doing. Or maybe a group of students gets together at the end of the term and gives you a small gift to thank you for your teaching. And the cockles of your heart, whatever they are, just get all warm. And you say to yourself, yes, this is why I am a teacher. Well, that's what this correspondence was for me from the ESL Conversation Club. In their correspondence, they said that they felt they knew me as a teacher through as a person through my books, and that they felt that I knew them and that they could tell that I cared about their success. They ended by writing this, and it's a quote. As Mowgli used to say, we are of one blood, you and us. And it was signed by people from 17 countries: Brazil, Bosnia, Japan, Ukraine, Vietnam, the United States, Senegal, Germany, Peru, Egypt, and more. It was a veritable mini United Nations. And they were, of course, quoting from the Jungle Book, not exactly, but close enough, by Rudyard Kipling, who was the winner of the 1907 Nobel Prize for Literature. And now, 99 years later, I recently heard a radio interview with the 2006 winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, Orhan Pamuk of Turkey. And in this interview, he warned against buying into cultural generalizations or cultural stereotypes as ways of dividing the essential oneness of humanity. He said that he felt the role of literature, he felt his role as a novelist, is to make us understand that, and I'm quoting him, we are the other. This is the kind of understanding we in English language teaching foster among real human beings every day of our work lives. The understanding that we are all in this together, we're really not that different from one another. The understanding that there's just one earth, one humanity, and one global society. When you think of all the people from other cultures and countries that this group in this room right now has touched, literally millions of people we in this room have touched through our teaching and our writing, it is clear that collectively, TESOL professionals add up to a significant positive force in the goodwill, connection, and understanding we help create among the peoples of the world. And that also guides us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, no. Thank you. Thank you. You're going to make me cry, so I'm going to sit down. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty. I think you've made us all very proud to be teachers today. Have a wonderful week. I'll see you around.